If you feel like you're lost in a pointless world, it's because you've become so focused on what the world does to you that you've completely lost sight of what you do to the world. And if that sentence pissed you off, then you can be twice as sure that it applies to you. A few weeks ago, I uploaded a video essay presenting a new philosophy for understanding why so many people feel lost and inconsequential. I call it effectivism, and if philosophy is to be anything other than just mental masturbation, eventually the rubber has to hit the road. So in this video, I'm going to explain precisely how to practice effectivism so that your real life becomes a game that you actually want to play. Because one thing is certain, nobody ever became great at a game that they hate. You can fucking quote me on that one.
But I'm not a rapper.
Since writing the effectivism video, I found a way to summarize the most actionable point of the philosophy into a single sentence. And that sentence is this: the belief that the juice is worth the squeeze is not a result of the juice, but rather the juice is a result of the belief that it's worth the squeeze. In other words, the belief that life is worth living is not a result of a good life, it's a requirement of one. Which is basically to say that you have to have faith that life is worth living before you have any proof, and the proof will follow as essentially a direct result of that faith. After all, if you don't believe that the juice is worth the squeeze, then you'll never squeeze, and so you'll never get the juice. I'm sure you can see how this is a vicious cycle, and it's made worse by the fact that no amount of fun, pleasure, or happiness will ever be enough to convince you that life is ultimately worth the trouble. Which actually explains why so many successful people, who by all measures seem to be living the good life, nonetheless decide to end it, which is just the ultimate demonstration of their belief that the juice is in fact not worth the squeeze. So, while philosophers have spilt liters of ink attempting to define what exactly the good life is, let's waste no more time on that problem by just saying this: the goodness of your life is equivalent to how little you find yourself wishing it would end. There are two reasons you wouldn't want your life to end: because you value what the world does to you, or because you value what you do to the world. If you value what the world does to you, which is just the experiences and feelings that you get while you're alive, and you value what you do to the world, then you'll have essentially achieved the highest form of success available to humans, so congratulations, have a biscuit, and enjoy the ride. But for the rest of us, how do we actually achieve this? Keep in mind that everything I've said so far is not a destination or a goal. It's just a compass that can tell you when you're going off course. But you still have to navigate the territory yourself. Still, at the end of this video, I'm going to boil it all down into an actual action plan, so that if you can't be asked to think, you can just follow the steps and hopefully it does what it's supposed to. I'm pretty confident that it will. The standard route that people take when they try to make life worth living is by focusing on the first part of that equation, what the world does to them, their feelings and experiences. So they attempt to fill their life with the stuff that they want: fame, money, success, sex, anything that makes them feel good. But to become an effectivist is to become more focused on the second part of that equation, the value of what you do to the world. I know this might sound dull and boring because fame and respect and all of that is way cooler, but you might find that when you actually feel yourself as the sole cause of effects that are actually happening out there in the real world, it feels pretty damn good. But to be motivated to do stuff to the world in the first place, you have to actually believe that it's worth the effort. So we're going to have to come to see the things that you've always used to motivate yourself, which is just positive experiences and feelings, as a bonus, as just a positive side effect, rather than the goal itself. But if you are particularly convinced that the world is pointless, you'll probably find it quite hard to imagine yourself ever deeply valuing anything beyond your own experiences. You might even be convinced that anybody who says that they do is either lying or confused. But as a former nihilist myself, I can assure you that you are mistaken. It's not only possible to create a meaningful life that you want to engage in, if you follow the requirements I'm about to lay out, then it's probable. I always struggle to say that word, probable. I have a speech impediment with R's, it's really annoying. And I'm not pulling these requirements out of my ass either, it's actually based on one of the most well-studied theories of human motivation, self-determination theory, or SDT for short. The core claim of SDT is that humans are far more effective when we're intrinsically motivated to do something, rather than extrinsically motivated. So what's the difference? If you watched the first video, it's the same as the difference between autotelic and heterotelic value, but I hadn't heard of these concepts before, so I invented way more confusing language. My bad. Anyway, here's the difference between the two. You're intrinsically motivated when the value of the thing that you're aiming at is in the thing that you're aiming at, when the reward of something is the thing itself. But you're extrinsically motivated when the value of your aim is derived from something else, like for example working a job that you hate, not because you value what you're doing, but because you value not being broke. For instance, if you're intrinsically motivated to learn the guitar, you do it because you love it. But if you're extrinsically motivated, you do it because you think it'll get you laid or make you money or something. Perhaps the worst symptom of the nihilism epidemic is that we now have almost an entire generation that just completely lacks intrinsic motivation. Their actions are almost entirely extrinsically motivated, and in most cases they'll only ever do something if they're sufficiently afraid of the consequences of not doing it. For example, 15-year-olds starting day trading simply because they're afraid of being seen as a failure or unsuccessful. The problem with this is that SDT studies showed that extrinsic motivation doesn't just leave you unfulfilled, it actually just makes you terrible at what you do. So if you want to be effective in your endeavor to create a life worth living, you're gonna need to cultivate intrinsic motivation to work toward goals that are bigger than yourself. And I'll explain why that's the case in the next part. The first thing to understand about motivation is that it is a snowball you have to roll, not a pile of treasure you have to find. Most people try to motivate themselves by listening to speeches or visualizing their goals or finding their passion. But an effectivist who understands the nature of motivation develops momentum-based systems instead. So let's develop a momentum-based system to get the snowball rolling. According to self-determination theory, there are 3 core ingredients to cultivating intrinsic motivation. The first is autonomy, sensing that you're doing what you're doing voluntarily. The second is competence, or effectiveness, sensing that you're capable and effective in what you're doing. And the third is relatedness, which is just sensing that you're relevant to something that's bigger than you. And maybe you already have something that you're intrinsically motivated to do, but if you don't, we're gonna have to build it. And I say build it because it's not something that you find, it is something that you create. And one great place to try your luck at different creative skills is actually the sponsor of this video, which is Skillshare. Skillshare is the biggest online learning platform in the world for creatives. And if you want to develop more intrinsic motivation to work on one of your creative skills, then seeing yourself actually get better at it is key. The problem is, getting better at creative stuff is really hard. That's why leaning on platforms like Skillshare, who have managed to get industry experts from just about every creative field to produce courses on their platform, is such a big hack. Whether it's writing or growing a YouTube channel or creating dope illustrations, Skillshare will create an entire learning path for you, so you never have to worry about whether or not you're learning things in the right order. On top of this, they have a learn by doing approach, which means that you'll actually be participating in the courses that you're taking, not just sitting down and listening the whole time. And with Skillshare, you get access to all of these courses and tons more for like a super affordable price. And the first 500 people who use the link in my description to sign up will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So definitely check it out, you might even find your passion on there. Okay, back to the video. The whole reason that so many people struggle to find their passion is the same as the reason that so many love-based marriages fail. We have become career romantics. Just as we believe that our soulmate is out there somewhere, reading a book on a train, just waiting for us to sweep them off their feet and live happily ever after, we also assume that our passion is somewhere out there just waiting to swoop us off our feet. But in reality, arranged marriages have a higher degree of long-term satisfaction. A 2012 study out of Harvard found that arranged marriages can become more satisfying over time, while love-based marriages often experience a steep decline in satisfaction after the initial high. And the same thing happens with careers. Oftentimes, career satisfaction actually grows gradually as a result of getting better at what you do and seeing the impact of it. So even if you feel like you don't have any passions or strong interests, that might just be because you've never stuck at something for long enough. So ask yourself, what hobbies have you had in the past? What topics have captured your interest, even in the smallest possible way? It doesn't have to be big. Maybe you found space kinda interesting as a kid. Perhaps you took a few martial arts classes and found that they were a lot more enjoyable than you'd expected. It doesn't matter as much as you think, just pick something. Ideally something that passes the Effectivist checklist. Yes, I said that purely because it rhymes, and as everybody knows, I am a rapper. Ideally, the thing that you choose should be something that you've at least been vaguely interested in at one point in time. Something that you might end up quite good at if you spend a lot of time doing it or studying it. And something that's actually valuable to other people. Once you've decided on it, the next step is to commit to doing a very, very small amount of it every day for the next week. And to write down that commitment now like it's a contract that you're making with yourself. If it's photography, for example, commit to taking just one photo a day on your phone and write that commitment down. You have to make sure that it's so small that it almost feels insulting to set the bar that low. And then the next step is to slowly increase it week by week. Even if you're not particularly enjoying it or you're not particularly motivated to do it, just do it.
Do it! Just do it!
So now maybe you're taking 5 photos per day. Eventually, you will become slightly better at it. And as soon as you notice yourself making that improvement, it'll become a whole lot more enjoyable very quickly. The point being, intrinsic motivation and passion are oftentimes the result of commitment rather than the other way around. And if you do the steps that I just laid out, you will already have 2 of the ingredients of intrinsic motivation. Autonomy, because you chose to do it voluntarily, and competence, because you're getting better at it. But these 2 things alone aren't quite enough. Without the third ingredient, relatedness, it might still feel empty or disconnected, even if it's becoming more enjoyable. So how do we cultivate relatedness? And this really is the fucking key ingredient. Relatedness is all about being relevant to something that's bigger than yourself. And I think that the best exploration of relatedness actually comes out of the University of Toronto, rather than from the self-determination theory guys. This cognitive scientist, who I've mentioned so often that you might think I have a crush on him, I do, coined the term relevance realization to essentially explain what your brain is up to. And the word realization has 2 meanings here, both to discover what's true and also to make real. Anyway, the theory goes like this. Every waking moment, you are exposed to infinitely more information than your brain is capable of processing. So what does this mean? It means that your brain needs to filter all of that information down to the most relevant pieces of information. But relevant to what? Relevant to your aims. For example, you don't notice every blade of grass. But if you see a snake, you'll notice it immediately. Because one aim that you always have is to avoid the shit that kills you. When you're hungry, you'll begin noticing signs for food everywhere. When you're horny, you'll begin noticing other things. Point being, your aims actually shape how reality presents itself to you. With different aims, you experience a different slice of reality. Think about that one for a bit, because it's a big deal. So anyway, how does all of this relate to relatedness? A pun has literally never been more intended. Well, it all comes down to value. Do you value the juice of life? Or do you just value how it tastes when you're the one drinking it? The best way to find out is by asking yourself this question. What would I want to exist, even if I didn't? How much do I truly care whether or not it exists in my absence? If you struggle to answer that question with conviction, chances are your relevance realization system is overly focused on filtering your conscious experience based on what's relevant to you rather than what you are relevant to. In other words, it means you probably don't care about much beyond your own experiences. A bitter pill to swallow indeed, but if you want to change that, then the first step is acknowledging it. So to cultivate relatedness and truly embed ourselves in the world and enter life, we need to be aiming at something that's bigger than ourselves. So with all this criteria in mind, let's create an action plan, a set of rituals and practices that help us find our own path and move towards a life that is both meaningful and actually worth living. first order of business is to implement a practice that helps us recalibrate our relevance realization to increase our sense of relatedness. It starts with a reflection exercise. Ask yourself daily, am I putting stuff into the world so that I can get more out of it? Or am I getting stuff out of the world so that I can put more into it? What would I focus on today if the latter was the case? Exercise 2 is to ask yourself, what would I want to exist even if I didn't, and how can I make a difference to it? And exercise 3 is to ask, what would I pay attention to today if I was a little less interested in noticing what might be relevant to me, and a little more interested in noticing what I might be relevant to? Reflect on these questions every day, and write down your answers. At the end of the week, reread your answers and see if they have any common threads or differences. And then the second relatedness exercise is to be done before you go to bed. Sit down, think about your day, and try to notice some of the ways in which your existence and your actions affected people. Ask yourself what would be different about the world right now if you hadn't done what you did today. The second order of business is to implement a set of practices that increase your effectiveness in whatever endeavor you're committed to. And no matter what that endeavor is, whether it's photography or martial arts or even physics, these essential practices will make you better at it. Meditation, exercise, a good sleep routine, 8 cups of water a day, a good diet, which is just minimizing processed foods, refined sugar and seed oils, and social interaction. And, if possible, sun. On top of those essentials, add your momentum-based system from part 2 of this video, such as taking 3 photos per day and at the end of each week, slightly increasing the amount for the next week and reviewing your progress. But if you already have something that you're actively pursuing, then the essential practices will make you more effective at it, since they quite literally just increase your ability to perform at everything. So in your notes app or calendar app or task management system, write down a checklist to recur every single day for these essentials. And underneath that checklist, write that it's okay to miss a day, but never 2 in a row. Generally, our sense of autonomy gets crushed for one of 2 reasons. The first reason is that we actually need to be doing something because the consequences of not doing it are worse. And the second reason is just fear of discomfort, often in the form of hard and awkward conversations. The first reason is unavoidable. If you need to work a job to pay the bills, you can't just quit that job without any other way of making money. We can't do much about this, but we can look in the mirror every morning and remind ourselves that while our circumstances are not always our choice, what we choose to do given those circumstances is. So that's the first reason, but the second reason for having your autonomy crushed is the unnecessary one. This is the one that we can do something about. We often compromise our autonomy just because we're avoiding hard conversations. For example, sticking around in a relationship that you don't want to be in anymore simply because you're avoiding the hard conversation of breaking up with them. Or continuing to take overtime hours at work even though your time is more valuable to you than the extra cash, simply because you're afraid of what your boss might think of you if you express that priority. And the exercise for that is easy to remember but very hard to do properly. Before bed, ask yourself, what hard conversations am I avoiding? So there we go. With these basic practices, a half-decent understanding of the ideas in this video, and a healthy dose of time, you will find your way. I hope this was useful to you, because reducing the total amount of nihilism and the sense of being lost is an effect that I deeply want to have on the world. And before I go, one of the best ways to feel more relevant to something bigger than yourself is to actually be a part of something bigger than yourself, like a community. I started a community called The Compass, which you can join completely for free, and it's probably full of a lot of people like you, and we do accountability challenges, we do weekly calls, and all sorts of other good stuff. So if you want to increase your sense of relatedness, then joining a community and actively contributing to it is something that has worked wonders for the members of the community, and it'll probably do the same for you as well. And if you want to support me and the channel, then join the Patreon, because I'm going to start posting exclusive, more unfiltered and uncut content on there. I'll be talking about more of my ideas that don't make it onto the main channel, as well as a little bit about how I make these videos and my approach to YouTube and stuff like that. So if that's something you're interested in, then join the Patreon. But that's just about it. Go do stuff to the world. Adios. Maybe that should be a t-shirt. Do stuff to the world. Someone should make that.